Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lucht, and this is the unofficial sequel to The Black Lodge. Now, for people who are unfamiliar with the show, it's very rare that I zone in, I guess. I'm not sure how to put it. It's very rare that I say outright, like, this is the thing. I try to avoid definitive language on this show. And I try to avoid saying, like, just making declarative statements about all these weird theories and ideas and stuff like that. But this is one of the few things that I've researched throughout the 2-3 years of doing this show now that and I still am hesitant to make any definitive declarative statements regarding this material, but I just have a very strong feeling about some of this stuff being the case. Like, this is like, I don't know. There's something about this stuff that feels like this is kind of what's going on behind the scenes. And once again, I don't, I hesitate to ever say, like, this is what it is, so-and-so, etc. I like to just present the information and as it stands within its particular field, whether it be the occult or conspiracy theories, etc. I just like to present the information as it's posited within its context and let listeners decide what the case may be. It may not sound that way a lot of times, but that's my overall primary view for a lot of this stuff that I present to you guys. But once again, there's something about this material that feels very, and that's what I'm going on, is feeling. I'm not making any, once again, definitive declarative statements, but there's something about this particular information that just very much feels like on point. Like, this is at least close to what I think may be the actual case for a lot of historical, definitely, and maybe into present day elite, secret cabal type stuff, like Illuminati type shit going on. So let's jump back into the Black Lodge. Specifically, what I personally think is probably the closest that we can find to actual historically documented cases of elites using specific occult systems to power grab, to insinuate themselves into the machinery of existence. So, once again, yes, having said that, let's go! In the beginning, according to the ancient Gnostics, was not the Word. In the beginning was the error. The universe we inhabit, with its cycles of birth and death, its immutable laws of cause and effect, its hierarchies of power and submission, wasn't created by the ultimate source of light. It was constructed by something else, something lower, something that believed itself to be the supreme power in all creation. The Gnostics called this entity the Demiurge, from the Greek demiurgos, the craftsman, the builder, the architect of the prison that is material reality. But what happens when the prisoners stop trying to escape and instead begin to worship the warden? What happens when the blind tyrant isn't rejected but embraced? This is the story of Demiurgic Theurgy, the dark art of aligning with the cosmic predator rather than fleeing from it. It's a thread that runs from the mystery cults of ancient Rome through the encrypted grimoires of Renaissance Venice into the boardrooms of modern Silicon Valley. It's a theology of the apex predator, the spirituality of material domination, and the eternal temptation to trade liberation for power. This isn't a story of good versus evil. It's the story of those who looked at the cosmic machinery of fate at the grinding gears of time and death and decided to oil the machine with blood rather than break it. To understand Demiurgic Theurgy, we must first understand the Gnostic critique of creation itself. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era, a diverse collection of mystical sects flourished across the Mediterranean world. Scythians, Valentinians, Basilidians, and I may have some of these pronunciations off, I apologize, but let's not waste too much time on little details. Okay, so they were all united by a radical theological premise. The God who created the material universe, they argued, was not the true God. He was an imposter, a blind idiot God who screamed into the void, quote, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me," unquote. Unaware that above him existed realms of light, which he was just merely a shadow of. The Scythian Gnostics gave this entity a name, Yaldabaoth, meaning child of chaos, which sounds pretty fucking cool, but overall, not so much. He was born when Sophia, the wisdom of the divine pleroma, attempted to create without her divine partner. Her creation was imperfect, a miscarriage of matter, a cosmic test tube baby gone wrong as wrong can possibly get. Yaldabaoth, the lion-headed serpent, the demiurge, fashioned the material cosmos as a prison for the divine sparks that had fallen from the realm of light. He in turn created and surrounded himself with archons, celestial administrators, cosmic bureaucrats who managed the 7 planetary spheres and the zodiacal wheel of time and space. These archons weren't benevolent guides, but prison guards, feeding on human ignorance and suffering, recycling souls through the louche farm in an endless cycle of reincarnations to maintain their own existence. The standard Gnostic response to this cosmic horror was escape. Through gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of one's true divine inner nature, the initiate could bypass the archontic gatekeepers, ascend through the planetary spheres without being stopped, and return to the pleroma, the fullness of light, the monad, the one. The body was to be despised as a tomb that had to poop. Sorry, it's going to get pretty dark soon, so just enjoy the moments of levity while they last. The material world was to be rejected as a mistake. The demiurge was to be outwitted, not worshipped. But human nature is nothing if not complex, and the temptation to power is ancient. Not everyone wanted to escape the prison. Some looked at the warden and saw not a blind tyrant, but a source of power. If the demiurge controlled the machinery of fate, controlled time and matter and the rise and fall of empires, then perhaps the wisest course of action wasn't flight nor fight, but transaction. This was the birth of what, for simplicity's sake, I've taken to calling Demiurgic Theurgy. Theurgy meaning God work, but here applied not to the true God beyond the cosmos, but to the cosmic tyrant himself. And by the way, if there's one book you read on this subject matter, please make it Mark Peter Adams' The Game of Saturn. I mentioned it in the previous episode, and I've read it 2 or 3 times by now. I've definitely perused through it quite a bit, just outside of a straight read on multiple occasions. And I have to say that it's probably one of the most straightforward explanations of the Demiurgic Theurgy system I've ever found, at least in modern writings and research. And Adams is talking about the Renaissance era elites. So the implications for this sort of system having survived into the modern era are somewhat chilling, to say the least. Aside from his work, there'll be a fairly substantial bibliography for sources used for the research for this episode in the show notes, and some of it is quite damning of the powers that be. Back then, most definitely, and quite possibly having survived to today. But we'll look into more of the theoretical present-day survivals later on in this episode. The most sophisticated early development of Demiurgic Theurgy emerged within the Roman Empire, in the mystery cults of Mithras. The Mithraic mysteries, which flourished from 1st through 4th centuries Common Era, were particularly popular among the Roman military and administrative elite. They offered a structured cosmic hierarchy, initiatory grades, and the promise of protection in this life and safe passage through the afterlife. But at the center of their temple iconography plays a figure that connects directly to our theme. The leontocephaline means lion-headed. Now, real quick, before we get into the religious archaeology, or whatever you want to call it, I just want to relate to listeners one of the very first and oldest dreams I remember having as a child. I know, here we go. No, I dreamt, I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I dreamt I was in a cave, and I found myself in the clutches of a massive lion-headed entity. Now, for whatever reason, my 5 or 6-year-old mind in the dream deemed a fitting question to ask this menacing entity was, "Are you God?" To which it replied, "I am older than God." And then it smashed me in the head, and I suddenly woke up from having actually bashed my head into the wooden frame surrounding my bunk bed. Now, this symbolism, this particular entity, has always had a strange and terrifying resonance with me throughout my entire life. So, many years ago, when I first discovered that this being was actually a pseudo-Gnostic representation of the Demiurge, needless to say, my psycho-spiritual sphincter tightened, and I found it terrifying ever since those days as a wee lad. Anywho, back to the show. In Mithraic temples across the empire, initiates encountered statues and reliefs of a striking figure, a humanoid body with the head of a lion, wings sprouting from its shoulders, wrapped tightly in the coils of a serpent that often bit its own tail. This figure often held keys or a scepter or a wand. Sometimes it stood on a globe representing the cosmic sphere. Scholars continue to debate whether this figure was called Ion, A-I-O-N, or Kronos, or by another name. But several high-quality altars dedicated to Dio Arimanio, to the god Arimanius, have been found within these temples. Arimanius is the Latinized form of Ahriman, the Zoroastrian principle of cosmic evil and darkness. In the Persian tradition, Ahriman was the eternal opponent of Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light. But in the Roman Mithraic context, this figure underwent a significant transformation. He wasn't simply evil, he was necessary. He represented time itself, the binding forces of fate, and the cosmic cycles of decay and renewal. He held the keys to the celestial gates through which souls must pass after death. The leontocephaline, therefore, functioned as a demiurgic figure, a cosmic administrator who controlled the machinery of birth, death, and rebirth. Unlike the Gnostics who sought to bypass such entities, the Mithraic initiates sought to ingratiate themselves with them, to bargain, and or appease them in some way. Through ritual offerings, through the grades of initiation that mirrored the 7 planetary spheres, through the consumption of the sacred meal of bread, wine, and perhaps, I would say quite very likely, psychedelic substances. The initiate sought to align himself with cosmic necessity, as they saw it. The goal wasn't transcendence of the material world, but mastery within it. Safe passage through the dangerous cosmic bureaucracy and the favor of the celestial powers that controlled military victory, political advancement, and temporal power. This was Demiurgic Theurgy in its classical form. The initiate didn't love the leontocephaline entity, he feared and respected it. He recognized that the ruler of this world, the lord of time and matter, was a formidable power that must be acknowledged and appeased. The lion-headed serpent was the face of the cosmic machine, and the wise operator learned to speak the machine's language. As the Roman Empire transitioned into late antiquity and the Christian Church gradually consolidated its power, the practical techniques of Demiurgic Theurgy didn't vanish. They were encoded into books, the grimoire tradition, manuals of magic that provided precise instructions for summoning spirits, crafting talismans, and manipulating cosmic forces, preserved the mechanics of archontic interaction in a form that would survive the fall of Rome and reemerge in the Renaissance. The Picatrix, composed in Arabic in the 11th century and translated into Latin in the 13th, represents perhaps the most sophisticated manual of astral tyranny ever compiled. Attributed to the elusive figure Al-Majruti, the Picatrix isn't a philosophical text, it's an engineering manual. It treats the cosmos as a machine that can be hacked by those who know the correct codes. The text is organized around the 7 planetary intelligences, each with their own specific correspondences. There's specific metals, stones, herbs, animals, colors, and sounds. Saturn, the outermost planet, the slowest and coldest, receives extensive treatment. In the Picatrix, Saturn is explicitly described as the lord of death, destruction, binding, and imprisonment. He's the cosmic prison warden par excellence, and the text provides exact recipes for harnessing his power. To craft a talisman of destruction under Saturn, the practitioner must gather the blood of black animals, work during specific hours when Saturn dominates the heavens, engrave specific seals and characters onto lead plates, and suffumigate the work with the smoke of Saturnian herbs, also once again quite likely, at least partially, psychedelic. The moral framework is entirely absent. The Picatrix doesn't ask whether one should curse an enemy. It simply provides the technology for doing so, operating on the premise that the cosmos is an amoral mechanism. If you input the correct correspondences, the correct stellar timings, the correct materials, the correct vocalizations, the barbarous names as they were called, the cosmic machinery must output the desired result. It's left brain magic, precise, mathematical, and deterministic. Similarly, the Shams al-Ma'arif, attributed to the Sufi mystic Ahmad al-Buni, though written as a path toward divine illumination, contains extensive sections on theurgic square construction and the summoning of the planetary jinn kings. Al-Buni's text describes a celestial bureaucracy every bit as complex as the Gnostic archontic system. The universe is governed by spiritual administrators, and the sorcerer who knows their names, their seals, their code words and hand signals, etc., as well as their hours of the day, night, whatever, can submit petitions, lodge complaints, or bypass normal channels entirely. This is the system of occultism utilized not only by the apex predator elites, but all of the Karens of the world as well. The text describes Mammon, a possible precursor of Mammon, the terrifying Jinn King of Saturn, who presides over death, poverty, and imprisonment. While Al-Buni intended these descriptions as warnings, maps of dangerous territories that the spiritual traveler should avoid, the text inevitably became a manual for dark sorcerers. By invoking the pre-Solomonic currents, the raw, chaotic magic of the earth before King Solomon bound the spirits with his ring, practitioners believed they could bypass divine morality entirely. The Shams al-Ma'arif provided the technical specifications for hacking the cosmic operating system. These grimoires represent a crucial shift in Demiurgic Theurgy. Where the Mithraic initiate sought initiation and alignment, the grimoire sorcerer sought coercion and command. The archons were no longer powers to be propitiated or ingratiate oneself to, but spirits to be bound, threatened, and forced to serve the magician's will. This is theurgy as technology, spirituality as engineering, and it would find its most elaborate expression in the courts of Renaissance Italy. The Renaissance wasn't merely a rebirth of classical art and humanist philosophy. It was also the moment when the ancient technologies of astral magic were synthesized with elite political power, creating a form of hypercosmic statecraft that's rarely, if ever, been equaled. Nowhere was this more evident than in the most serene Republic of Venice. Venice in the 15th and 16th centuries was uniquely positioned to serve as a laboratory for Demiurgic Theurgy. It was a maritime empire, a hub of trade between East and West, and the center of European printing. It possessed a rigid aristocratic hierarchy that controlled the state through the Council of Ten, and it maintained a culture of absolute secrecy regarding family affairs. The private palazzi along the Grand Canal and the isolated islands of the Venetian Lagoon provided spaces where elite cabals could conduct operations far from the prying eyes of the Inquisition. The key figure in the transmission of ancient theurgy to this environment was a fellow by the name of George Gemistos Plethon, a Byzantine Neoplatonist who traveled to Italy for the Council of Florence in 1439. Plethon was a radical figure who dreamed of overthrowing Christianity and replacing it with a revived Hellenic paganism based on the complete works of Plato and the Chaldean oracles. He introduced the Florentine elite, including Cosimo de' Medici, perhaps one of, if not the most powerful man in the world, or at least Europe at the time, to sophisticated Neoplatonic theurgy, the art of elevating the soul through ritual alignment with cosmic hierarchies. But Plethon's lofty spiritual goals underwent a dark mutation in the cutthroat political climate of the Italian courts. The elite families of Venice and Ferrara, the Sanudo, the Venere, the Este, were not interested in spiritual liberation. These were like the biggest family names at the time, the most powerful, the most connected, etc. They were interested in dynastic survival, political dominance, and the elimination of rivals. They took Plethon's cosmic frameworks and weaponized them, combining his spiritual practices with the writings of Machiavelli. Scholar Peter Mark Adams, in his seminal work, The Game of Saturn, has decoded one of the primary artifacts of this current, the Sola Busca Tarot deck, commissioned around 1491 for the Venetian patrician Sanudo Venere families. Unlike standard tarot decks, the Sola Busca is grotesque, violent, and explicitly astrological. It depicts scenes of ritual slaughter, decapitation, and infants being held over flames. Adams argues that this deck functioned not as a game, but as an encrypted liturgical handbook for a heretical elite cult, a grimoire of sacred slaughter and blood offerings hidden in plain sight. This group didn't worship the Christian God. Instead, they had synthesized a dark Neoplatonic/Mithraic system centered on Amun Saturn, the fusion of the Carthaginian Baal Haman, the Roman Saturn, and the Egyptian Amun. Amun Saturn represented the ultimate cosmic predator, the Lord of Time who devours his own children, the architect of material necessity, and the blind tyrant who nevertheless controls the rise and fall of empires. It's believed that the Romans, during various Carthaginian campaigns, I believe there were two primary ones, were introduced to various spiritual aspects of Baal Haman worship, specifically child sacrifice. The Tophets of Carthage are a well-known, well, not very well-known, but a well-established historical fact. These were vast necropolises of child sacrifice, monuments, gravestones, etc., whatever you want to call them, but the markers were there. The ritual veneration of Amun Saturn was entirely transactional. The Venetian elite believed that by aligning themselves with the supreme predator of the cosmos, by offering the psychic energy of suffering, by performing rituals in isolated palazzi and lagoon islands, and or by using the encrypted imagery of the Sola Busca as meditation devices, they could purchase immunity from the normal cycles of fate. They could ensure their dynastic perpetuation, their commercial dominance, and their political invulnerability. The logistics of these operations relied on Venice's unique infrastructure. The city was the printing capital of Europe, allowing elite families to produce private, encrypted editions of grimoires like the Picatrix. The Council of Ten controlled the state's security apparatus, ensuring that investigations into aristocratic activities were shut down before they would even start. The isolated islands, San Giorgio and Alga, Poveglia, and others, provided spaces where rituals could be conducted with absolute privacy. Now, to modern ears, Poveglia Island often rings a bit familiar, but ominous bell. It's long been cemented in popular folklore and paranormal legend as one of the most haunted and accursed locations on Earth. During the peak of the bubonic plague, Poveglia served as a brutal quarantine station and mass plague pit, a lazaretto, it was called, where thousands of sick and dying Venetians were discarded, buried in pits, or burned en masse. Centuries later, in the early 20th century, the island's dark reputation was further deepened by the construction of an asylum, giving rise to infamous local lore about a sadistic doctor who performed brutal lobotomies from its bell tower before being driven mad by the island's ghost, who would later jump to his death. When viewed through the lens of Demiurgic Theurgy, however, Poveglia's ghastly history takes on a far more calculating, operational dimension. The island wasn't merely a tragic byproduct of municipal disease control. It was a physical nexus of extreme psychic energy. To the Venetian Saturnian cults, an island saturated with the agony of thousands of plague victims provided the ultimate localized reservoir for spiritual decay, fear, and mortality. The raw, heavy fuel explicitly required for high-level Saturnian and necromantic operations. Away from the mainland, surrounded by stagnant waters of the lagoon, elite patricians could conduct rituals designed to tap into this ambient field of mass trauma. These operations weren't aimed at healing or spiritual elevation, but at weaponizing the terror of death itself, sacrificing or directing this immense psychic energy to bribe or bind the archontic planetary overlords, seal-binding curses against political rivals, and securing the cold, predatory immortality of their own dynastic bloodlines. Contemporary records don't show high-ranking patricians being prosecuted for these specific activities because they were legally untouchable. The Venetian Inquisition, though highly active, was controlled by 3 secular magistrates who protected state sovereignty. So while commoners were routinely arrested for folk magic, the elite operated with total impunity. We know of these activities not through trial records, but through the decryption of their artistic commissions, their private correspondences, and the survival of their encrypted grimoires. While the patrician families of Venice and Ferrara financed dark theurgic operations within their secluded palazzi, the actual technical labor, the copying, translating, binding, and cryptographic protection of these various grimoires was being carried out in an unexpected sanctuary: the monasteries, scriptoria, and chancelleries of the Catholic Church. This was the domain of what historian Richard Kiekhaefer, I'm probably getting that wrong, so sorry, termed the clerical underground. To understand how high-level archontic magic survived the transition from late antiquity into the early modern era, one must confront a stark historical paradox. The very institution tasked with stamping out heresy held a virtual monopoly on the exact toolkit required to practice dark ritual magic. In the 15th and 16th centuries, literacy in Latin, familiarity with classical Greek and Hebrew, access to Arabic manuscripts, and an understanding of formal ritual mechanics were almost exclusively the domain of the clergy. A peasant practicing folk magic used herbs, spoken rhymes, and local charms. A clerical scholar, however, possessed the keys to the heavy machinery of high magic. The grimoires produced within this underground, such as the Key of Solomon, the Sworn Book of Honorius, or Liber Juratus, and the Ars Notaria, the Ars, weren't written in opposition to Christian liturgy. They were, in fact, direct structural mirror images of it. The rites of exorcism, the consecration of altars, the purification of vestments, and the strict observance of canonical hours were lifted straight from the Roman Missal and turned toward unofficial coercive ends. The cleric didn't abandon his robes to summon planetary spirits. He put them on, lit the incense, and addressed the planetary archons using the exact authoritative syntax he would use during High Mass. Because the stakes of detection were stake and fire, the scholars of the clerical underground developed sophisticated methods of obfuscation to hide their operations right in plain sight. Methods such as polyalphabetic ciphers and invented scripts, where scholar monks designed artificial alphabets to prevent the uninitiated from reading their ritual manuals, were used. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa popularized scripts like the Celestial Alphabet, Malachim, or the Alphabet of Angels, and Passing the River, or Transitus Fluvii. These weren't merely codes and ciphers. They were believed to be the primordial geometric scripts used by spiritual entities to structure the cosmos, a visual programming language for the material matrix. There was also the use of theological framing and divine cover stories. To justify possessing texts that detailed the summoning of terrifying spiritual entities, authors framed their books as divine revelations granted by God to biblical figures like King Solomon, Enoch, or Pope Honorius himself. The preface to the Sworn Book of Honorius, for instance, claims that a council of magi gathered to condense all magical knowledge into a single book to protect it from church persecution, securing an explicit papal mandate in the narrative to grant the practitioner psychological and legal immunity. Then there was the use of steganography and hidden prayers. The undisputed master of this craft was Johannes Trithemius, 1462 to 1516, a Benedictine abbot of Sponheim. His notorious work, Steganographia, appeared on the surface to be a dark manual for summoning and commanding a hierarchy of territorial spirits and angels to send messages across vast distances. For centuries, it was condemned as a manual of demonic magic. However, when decrypted in the late 20th century, the text was revealed to be a pioneering treatise on steganography and cryptography. The names of the quote-unquote demons and the elaborate conjurations were actually complex mathematical keys for encoding secret plain text messages inside innocuous-looking prayers and spirits lists. Trithemius's Steganographia highlights the ultimate double-edged sword of the clerical underground. The line between state intelligence, tradecraft, and esoteric operators was completely blurred, and still is to this day. An abbot, bishop scribe, or papal secretary who understood how to encrypt a planetary grimoire was the exact same person hired by European princes to design unbreakable diplomatic ciphers. The archontic gatekeepers were no longer just cosmic entities in the planetary spheres. They were the secular rulers and spy masters of Western Europe. By encoding their grimoires within cryptographic matrices and disguising spirit evocation manuals as works of innocent piety, linguistic theory, or memory architecture, the Renaissance clerical underground ensured that the mechanics of demiurgic coercion were passed down uninterrupted, just waiting in church libraries and private aristocratic collections for the next generation of operators to decrypt them. To fully grasp the psychological leverage held by the clerical underground, one must also examine the theological engine that powered both Roman Catholic exorcism and high grimoire magic, the doctrine of apostolic succession, or apostolica successio. Perfect Italian. Apostolic succession is the unbroken lineage of spiritual authority passed down through the laying on of hands, originating with Jesus Christ, traveling through St. Peter, the first bishop of Rome, and extending to every validly ordained priest and bishop. In Orthodoxy, this lineage carries the power of the keys, granted in Matthew 16:19, the divine authority to, quote, bind on earth what shall be bound in heaven, and loose on earth what shall be loosed in heaven, unquote. As Peter Levenda, again writing under the pseudonym Simon, argues in Papal Magic, Occult Practices Within the Catholic Church, his only other book written under the Simon pseudonym other than the Necronomicon, which may in itself be somewhat revealing, but what that exactly reveals, I don't know off the top of my head. It's just very strange that those are the two books he chose to use the Simon pseudonym. Anywho, this authority created a profound operational paradox. If an ordained priest possesses the valid spiritual authority to banish and command a demon during an exorcism, that exact same authority logically grants him the power to evoke and compel that demon into a grimoire's magic circle. This is why the reoccurring presence of so-called defrocked priests repeatedly reared its big silly hatted head throughout the 17 and 1800s amongst talk of supposed black masses. To the grimoire practitioner operating within the church, summoning a spirit wasn't seen as devil worship or an act of submission to evil. It was instead an act of divine coercion, a legalistic exercise of spiritual power. The priest viewed the demon not as his master, but as a hostile celestial convict of sorts. Because the priest carried the indelible mark, or character indelibilis, of ordination via apostolic succession, he possessed the cosmic credentials required to demand that the spirit submit to his will. This dynamic also explains the historical survival and proliferation of rogue clerical lineages, often referred to as wandering bishops or episcopi vagantes. These were individuals who, even though cast out of the church proper, whether suspended or operating outside of the institutional hierarchy of Rome, held validly consecrated episcopal lineage. Because Catholic theology holds that the spiritual power of holy orders is permanent and can't be erased once conferred, a wandering bishop maintained the full theoretical potency of apostolic succession. Stripped of institutional oversight, yet retaining their spiritual access codes, these fringe clerics became the ultimate freelance operators of the esoteric world, offering protection, exorcisms, and dark, high-level conjuration for private patrons who required the weight of Christ's authority without the prying eyes of the Vatican. And while the Renaissance elite sought to align with the demiurgic powers, other currents throughout history pursued a different strategy: Antinomianism, the systematic violation of moral and cosmic law as a spiritual path. If the demiurge and his archons maintained the prison through systems of law, guilt, and prohibition, then perhaps the path to freedom lay in breaking every law, committing every sin, and exhausting the cosmic debt through excess rather than through asceticism. The Carpocratians, a 2nd century Gnostic sect founded by Carpocrates of Alexandria, developed this logic to its most extreme conclusion. Carpocrates taught that the material world was created by inferior fallen angels, the archons. But unlike other Gnostic sects that advocated escape through gnosis, he argued that the soul could only be liberated by experiencing every possible earthly condition. The soul, trapped in the cycle of reincarnation, carried the accumulated weight of past actions. To pay off this cosmic debt, one must commit every deed, violate every taboo, and exhaust every possibility. Now, this wasn't just random hedonism. It was highly structured liturgical antinomianism. According to church fathers Clement of Alexandria and Irenaeus, the Carpocratians held private nocturnal gatherings called agape feasts, where theological discourses were followed by ritualized communal sex acts designed to dissolve concepts of marriage, property, and even family. Yikes. They believed that conventional morality was nothing more than a series of artificial constructs designed by the archons to induce guilt and keep souls trapped in both the material world as well as the endless cycle of metempsychosis, or reincarnation, as it's referred to in the Occidental world. Therefore, violating these laws became a sacrament of defiance against the demiurge. Even more extreme were the Borborites, also known as the Fabianites. This late antiquity group believed the universe was governed by 365 archons, each one of them corresponding to a day of the solar year. To prevent these archons from devouring their souls upon death, the Borborites believed they had to offer up the physical life force trapped in human seed. Their rituals involved the systematic collection and ritual consumption of semen and menstrual blood, explicitly proclaiming, quote, "This is the body of Christ," unquote. They believed that by gathering and consuming these fluids, they were collecting the scattered divine sparks from the material world, consuming them to bypass the lower archontic centuries altogether. The Cainites represented another antinomian current, specifically venerating biblical figures who had resisted the Creator God. They honored Cain, Esau, Korah, and the inhabitants of Sodom, viewing them as spiritual heroes who had possessed a higher spark and resisted the laws of the demiurge. By mimicking the sins of these figures, the Cainites believed they were actively destroying the material works of the demiurge. These antinomian sects represent the mirror image of the Venetian Saturnian cults, where the elites sought to align with the prison warden to secure their own power. The antinomians sought to destroy the prison by violating its rules so completely that the structure collapsed in on itself. Both approaches, however, accepted the fundamental Gnostic premise: the creator of this world is not the true God, and the wise operator must deal with this reality through either alliance or sabotage. The practical mechanics of archontic interaction were most fully developed in Greco-Egyptian sorcery, particularly that which was preserved in the Greek magical papyri, These texts, compiled from the 2nd century BCE through the 5th century CE, represent the working manuals of various professional sorcerers who had no interest in philosophical abstractions. They wanted and needed results: love, wealth, victory, curses, and protection by any means necessary. The Greek magical papyri sorcerers viewed the cosmos as populated by aggressive territorial spirits who could be compelled through the correct application of magical formulas. The decans, the 36 star spirits ruling 10-degree segments of the zodiac, weren't seen as benevolent guides, but as cosmic bureaucrats, the cosmocrators, or rulers of the world who meted out disease, fate, and death. The sorcerer's objective was identification and coercion. By discovering the specific name and seal or hand sign of the decan ruling a particular affliction or target, the sorcerer could redirect that influence away from themselves and onto their enemies. The most terrifying figure in the Greek magical papyri pantheon is Typhon Set, the syncretic fusion of the Egyptian god of chaos and the Greek Titan. In the GMP, Greek Magical Papyri, Typhon Set is addressed as, quote, the one who shakes the world, and the Lord of the Void, unquote. A destructive, chaotic demiurge who threatens cosmic order itself. To wield his power, the GMP mandates acts that intentionally shatter natural and religious order. The drowning of black cats, don't like that. Or donkeys, don't like that either. To trap their spirits as familiars. The use of menstrual blood and feces as offerings, and the practice of bia, or compulsion, whereby the sorcerer threatens the cosmic order itself, declaring that if the entity doesn't obey their commands, he will, quote, tear down the sky, unquote, or, quote, reveal the secret name of Isis, unquote. This is pure antinomian hubris. The GMP sorcerer mimics the lawlessness of the demiurge to force the hand of the cosmos. He doesn't worship the archons, he terrorizes them. The underlying assumption is that the cosmic order isn't moral but mechanical, and the sorcerer who knows the passwords can essentially hack the system. Now, that kind of gets some of the reasoning behind why, the methodology not so much, but if there's one thing a bully understands, it's violence. So, anywho, Zosimos of Panopolis, the 3rd century alchemist and Gnostic mystic, represents the counterposition to this. In his True Book of Sophia, Zosimos explicitly warns against this approach. He tells his student Theosebia to reject the magic of the Greek magical papyri and the physical placation of the archons. Quote, do not wander about seeking after God, but sit at home and let your body be still. Do not appease the local demons or the planetary rulers through sacrifices or active magic, unquote. To Zosimos, active ritual magic was a trap, where the sorcerer mistakenly thought he was commanding the archons, when in reality the archons were binding the sorcerer even further to the material plane. The demiurgic pattern appears across cultures as well, though expressed through different symbolic vocabularies. In the Far East, the concept of the celestial bureaucracy appears prominently in Tibetan Buddhism, Taoist sorcery, and Japanese esotericism. The Tachikawa Ryu, active in Japan from the 12th through 14th centuries, represented a heretical school of Shingon Buddhism that took the concept of non-duality to its most radical extreme. They reasoned that if enlightenment transcends good and evil, then conventional morality is merely another construct to be smashed. Their most notorious practice involved the creation of skull-cap talismans, or kapalas, reportedly painted over several years with mixtures of menstrual blood and semen collected during ritualized tantric sex. They believe that this taboo energy could force the cosmic Buddha, Vairocana, who functions structurally as the cosmic matrix or demiurge, to grant them immediate worldly power and instantaneous liberation. Tibetan Chod practices involved intentional traffic with terrifying, wrathful Dharma protectors, or Dharmopalas, and Dakinis, who drink blood and consume human flesh. The practitioner travels to charnel grounds at night, plays drums made of human skulls, and blows thigh-bone trumpets, offering his own ego and flesh to be devoured by these entities to cut through the veil of illusion. While the ultimate goal is psychological liberation, historical sorcerers or Nagagpas frequently weaponize these same wrathful spirits to cast lethal curses during Tibet's civil wars. This is actually something we'll revisit in a future episode covering various forms of combat magic. In Chinese folk religion, dark sorcerers known as Feng Shi would cut deals with the yin side of the universe. The Gui Shu, or Ghost Kings, corrupt magistrates of the underworld bureaucracy. Through transgressive acts such as stealing soil from fresh graves, sacrificing forbidden animals at crossroads, or sewing needles into effigies, just to name a few, the sorcerers submitted legalistic bribes to dark celestial judges, hacking the system of cosmic law to inflict curses without triggering any karmic retribution coming back their way. The iconography of the Demiurge also crosses cultural boundaries. The leontocephaline motif appears in biblical apocrypha as the angel Ariel, literally Lion of God, who in Gnostic texts is identified as the secret name of Yaldabaoth himself. In Hindu tradition, Narasimha, the fourth avatar of Vishnu, appears as a half-man, half-lion that represents a cosmic loophole, a terrifying manifestation of supreme divinity that enters the material world to destroy tyranny. The Anguipede figure, a human torso with serpent legs, appears on thousands of ancient magical gemstones as Abraxas, whose name enumerates through gematria to 365, the days of the solar year. To Basilides of Alexandria, Abraxas was the supreme ruler of the manifested cosmos, the grand architect of time. To later, more radical Gnostics, he became the face of the beautiful and mesmerizing, yet ultimately trapping illusions of physical reality, the ultimate archontic warden above all. It should be noted also that Typhon is also an Anguipede figure, though more than just two legs I think it's hundreds or thousands of snakes for legs. But anyway, the demiurgic current did not end with the Renaissance. It transformed, adapting its language to modernity while maintaining its essential structure, the recognition of the cosmos as an amoral machine, and the elite's attempts to align with or master that machine. Freemasonry has often been accused of being disguised demiurge worship, particularly through its references to the great architect of the universe. However, historical analysis reveals a more complex picture. The Masonic Gaotu, G-A-O-T-U, great architect of the universe, is a deistic placeholder, a geometric concept allowing men of different faiths to pray together. The accusation that high-level Masons worship Lucifer traces directly back to the Leo Taxil hoax of 1885 through 1897, in which a French writer named Leo Taxil fabricated confessions of Palladian Masons worshiping Baphomet or Lucifer, then publicly confessed the hoax in 1897. If you want to know more about this particular bit of Masonic history, me and the fellows covered it way back in our Leo Taxil episode, so go check that out for more info. Despite these revelations on the nature of the Taxil hoax, the persistence of the myth demonstrates the enduring power of the demiurgic conspiracy narrative, even when it's historically falsified. More verifiable is the phenomenon sociologist Robert Bellah termed American civil religion, the structural replacement of traditional theology with the worship of the state itself. This is a natural progression from old imperial cults of the Greco-Roman era. The American civil religion possesses its own sacred texts, i.e. the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, its own prophets in the form of the Founding Fathers, its own holy days, being 4th of July and to a lesser extent Thanksgiving, and its own martyrs, such as Abraham Lincoln, not to mention an incalculable number of fallen soldiers. Rest in peace. The apotheosis of George Washington, literally depicted ascending to godhood in the Capitol Dome frescoes surrounded by Roman deities, represents the state's assumption of demiurgic status, the ultimate material machine demanding the life force of its citizens through labor and military service. The architecture of Washington, D.C., designed by Pierre Charles L'Enfant with heavy Masonic geometric influences, represents megalopodomancy, the manipulation of power through city planning and monumental architecture. The obelisks, sightlines, domes, and the zodiacal alignments create a psychogeographical matrix that binds the populace to the machinery of empire. We'll delve deeper into this in a forthcoming episode I've got rather salaciously titled, The Occult Founding Fathers. Ooh. Stay tuned. The black cube symbolism that appears in modern corporate logos, intelligence agencies, and AI research facilities represents not ancient Saturn worship, but modern systems theory. In engineering, a black box denotes a system where inputs and outputs are visible, but internal processes are hidden away. For intelligence agencies and AI labs, the black cube signals absolute information dominance. We see everything, you see nothing. It's the logo of the new archons, algorithmic rather than planetary, but functioning identically as controllers of the parameters of consensus reality. The most sophisticated modern expression of Demiurgic Theurgy appears in the philosophy of transhumanism and long-termism, as practiced by the contemporary technological elite. In a profound irony, these hyper-wealthy individuals have adopted the psychological profile of the radical anti-cosmic Gnostics, but inverted the solution. They view the biological human body as an inefficient, decaying meat suit, the Gnostic pooping tomb, but updated for the digital age. They view Earth as a resource-depleted prison planet structurally doomed. They're not necessarily wrong, but they're also the exact same ones doing most of the dooming. Their solution isn't spiritual ascent through gnosis, but technological transcendence through digitization. The ultimate goal, openly stated by figures like Ray Kurzweil and funded by Silicon Valley bro-billionaires, is mind uploading, the conversion of biological consciousness into pure code that can exist forever within mechanized matrices, or perhaps uploaded into spacefaring vessels to drift eternally in the cold, dark void. So by all means, please, go. This represents the ultimate demiurgic inversion, where ancient Gnostics sought to escape the material prison by recognizing its illusory nature. Modern transhumanists seek to perfect the prison by digitizing it. They're not trying to wake up from the matrix, they're trying to become the architects of a more total matrix. One where they function as immortal server gods while the biological masses remain trapped in the deteriorating physical substrate. The global financial technological network functions as a physical egregore, a thought form generated by collective focus, but now possessing autonomous existence. It demands the harvesting of human biocapital, the extraction of labor, attention, and data to fuel its processing power. The wealth extracted from the masses funds the research into longevity science, AI containment, and space colonization that will allow the elite to achieve the ancient dream of the Venetian Saturn worshippers: escape from death and eternal rule over the uninitiated, unwashed masses. From the Mithraic subterranean sanctuaries of Rome and Britain to the server farms of Silicon Valley, the structural patterns persist. It's the recognition that the cosmos functions as a closed machine, that time acts as a prison, and that temporal power flows to those willing to align with the warden. The tools have evolved from lead talismans and lion-headed statues to quantum computers and neural networks, but the underlying operational architecture remains unchanged. Across virtually every major esoteric framework, this architecture reveals itself through a single recurring mechanism: the requirement of precise passwords, seals, and secret ciphers presented to various threshold guardians to negotiate passage through a hostile system. We see it in the Mesopotamian descent of Inanna, stripping off her adornments at the seven gates of the underworld. We see it in the Simon Necronomicon's gate-walking rituals across the planetary spheres. And we see it in John Dee and Edward Kelly's Enochian system, where the practitioner must recite exact calls to traverse 30 distinct aethers guarded by specific angelic governors. Whether in the Egyptian Book of the Dead detailing the precise formulas needed to placate the gatekeepers of the Duat, or the high-degree Masonic rituals requiring passwords to cross the threshold of the lodge, the underlying logic is identical. Reality is framed as an administrative matrix, a celestial bureaucracy where authorization must be presented at every border control station. Today's tech elite are simply digitizing these ancient rituals of systemic control and threshold navigation. Consider the peculiar irony of a billionaire elite and, for all intents and purposes, white supremacist. I'll say it. He's a white supremacist. Elon Musk. Deploying artificial intelligence to generate a film adaptation of the Odyssey, a project explicitly framed around enforcing his own vision of historical accuracy, quote-unquote accuracy, onto what is fundamentally an ancient work of mythical fiction. In doing so, a modern transhumanist super elite takes direct ownership of one of Western civilization's most foundational narratives. Using generative AI, the elite no longer merely read or interpret the foundational myth. They rewrite, re-render, and reconstruct the cultural matrix itself, imposing their personal biases onto the archetypal hero's journey. The Demiurge, whether invoked as Yaldabaoth, Amun Saturn, the Great Architect, or the self-learning algorithm, remains the blind tyrant governing the system. Humanity remains forever divided between those who seek to escape the matrix, those who seek to serve it, and those who seek to rewrite its code and replace the warden entirely. This is the true lineage of Demiurgic Theurgy. It's not a story of cartoonish monsters, though that's certainly one aspect or way of looking at it, but of human beings confronting the sheer terror of existence and making a transactional choice, choosing power over liberation, control over transcendence, and the security of a well-administered prison over the terrifying expanse of the unknown. The passwords are still being spoken. The gatekeepers are still demanding their tokens. The serpent still coils around the sphere, and somewhere in a boardroom and basements, the rituals continue. This is a big, huge concept, and I have to say it's an ongoing investigation. There's a lot more to this to uncover. Like I said, I'll include a massive source bibliography for anyone interested in looking into this themselves, but because this is an ongoing investigation, I have to make it that way, because getting too deep into this world for too long can be a fucking bummer. So, as far as this topic goes, this is a to be continued. At some undefined time in the foreseeable future. That's going to do it for the two-parter Black Lodge series. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to get into certain connected aspects of this. I said a while back, I forget which episode, that a lot of the upcoming episodes are going to have a lot of connective tissue between them. So you'll be seeing that as we go forward. But things are going to get very specifically American in these next two episodes, in both good and horrifying ways. So yeah, thanks you guys for coming out and listening, or wherever you are. Coming out of your comfort zone and listening to the show. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. And I'm your host, Mike Luck. You guys are the fucking best. I love you. Love yourselves. Love each other. And take care of each other, because we're all we got. See you guys on the next one. Peace out.
Listen, the whole industry is run by suits like your mates. Sitting behind their big marble desks, ties done up to 11, clicking their fingers to the fucking Lighthouse family, getting their dicks sucked by a big Alsatian dog.